Let's see. All right, and we're live. Hey, this is your brother from another brother Mays. Hey guys, welcome to, and I'm changing the name tonight to Late Night with Brother Mays. And of course, if you're seeing this beautiful face on my screen right now, you're seeing the one and only Diane T. Ashley. She is my special guest in the house, and thank you for joining me tonight. First of all,
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
well, thank you. I mean, you've kind of weathered the storm and of seeing how this goes and as a Facebook Live. So I appreciate this. So since you guys who follow me and love to hear all the special guests that I have, I'm going to give a quick rundown of this lady that we have, special guest that I have in front of me. Give her background. Diane T. Ashley is probably one of the most prominent women we're going to have on this show so far. So stay tuned because she is going to really enlighten us tonight. But I want to shed a little light on her background. So if you have any questions, please save them because we have a lot to deal with tonight, or should I say, go through. And let's see here, get her bio ready here. I had it up. There we go. So Diane T. Ashley is the CEO of DTA Diversity Accounts, a corporate diversity and inclusion advisory firm, and she founded after her 2019 retirement from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. She is a strategist and a team member with a track record of developing and directing the implementation of transformative diversity initiatives for Global Citigroup and New York Federal Reserve Bank. Diane's entire career has been fueled by a passion of translating corporate desires for increased diversity into programs that fully engage organizations top to bottom in understanding and embracing diversity in corporate culture change as necessary, attainable components of organizational success strategy. Her strategic initiatives include launching the agency's very first Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which has been replicated throughout the Federal Reserve System and to this day serves as the Fed's model for increasing workforce and supplier diversity. And of course, she's also developed and maintained strong relationships with lawmakers, exercising oversight on congressionally mandated federal programs. Now, I'm going to stop right there because obviously you can see she's very qualified. But Diane, tell us something because when in a prior conversation that we had, you
hmm
mentioned this phrase, embracing the pause. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. And, I'm certainly sending out hopefully best wishes to all of you who have been enduring this whole COVID-19 pandemic experience. I mean, I was talking today and facilitating a national workshop, and I said, when we planned it last year, I don't think any of us, both in the United States and around the world, had any idea the world in which we would find ourselves this year.
Yeah.
So I live in the New York metropolitan area, and I will
Mhm.
say this, when New York was shut down, and it was shut down tight in the early part of March, there are a
Mhm.
lot of different ways that we can approach a crisis, aren't there? I mean, we can
Right.
approach a crisis from the standpoint of panicking, we can approach it from the standpoint of complaining, we can
Mhm.
approach it from the standpoint of depression. And I
Mhm.
said, you know what? These are all things which are very, very germane and very, very relevant and
Mhm.
unfortunately familiar to us as people of color. And so I said, when we were shut down, I said, you know what? I'm going to take a different tack this time, thematically. I am
Okay.
going to say, why don't we think about embracing the pause? And by that, I meant simply that because sometimes we are so busy flying from here to there, going to this meeting, going to that meeting,
Yes.
never home, so we really don't have an opportunity and haven't oftentimes taken the opportunity to do some
Mhm.
self reflection. So, by embrace the pause, what I meant by that simply is that take the time to experience being introspective, being reflective, start really assessing, taking stock. Where
Mhm.
are you in your life? Where are you with your work, your relationships, yourself, your own
Mhm.
happiness? That's what embracing the pause was really all about.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because as I was telling you once before, refounded this show because of the COVID-19, and the whole interest and the motive behind this show was really saying, okay, why not now? I had a great career years ago as an instructor. And of course, obviously, life happens and I made some changes. And of course, within the latter few months, what I found out was that now was the time. And so either I embraced it or I just said, I'm going to throw my hands in there. But with that being said, who does this really benefit when it comes to embracing the pause? Is there a particular group of people that you would say or demographic say, hey, this is definitely for me at this moment?
I think it honestly it affects and it really benefits everyone. And
Mhm.
why do I say that? I think actually, we were talking about this before we went on the air. I think it's probably one of the few times when the corporate white American business community was forced into having to be, as people say, woke.
Mhm.
America has awoken. Awaken is the proper word, but
Mhm.
awoken is what people are saying. But
Mhm.
America really has come to an understanding, and it was forced upon them, I think,
Mhm.
frankly, because we had what I call a perfect storm, right? We had COVID-19, which shut everybody into the house,
Mhm.
shelter in place. You put an overlay of that of almost 40 million people who are out of a job or furloughed. And then
Right.
on top of that, then we've got the series of unjust killings, police brutality, privilege
Mhm.
being exercised. And
Mhm.
all of this is actually not new information, but what has changed from the last time? Because a lot of
Mhm.
people are asking, like, what's different now than what happened in the 60s and the civil rights marches? A few things are different. One thing
Mhm.
is that we've got a multicultural approach to it now. I have
Right.
seen
Right.
marches on television where you've got mostly white young people who are
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
marching,
Yeah.
and they're doing the marching carrying Black Lives Matter signs. So that's a
Mhm.
huge difference. And I think the other big difference, which has kind of impacted why now, is
Mhm.
that we have a little piece of technology called the cell phone. So
Yes.
things like the
Yes.
George Floyd killing,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
only gotten the notoriety that it's gotten because that young lady, that African American young lady, had the
Mhm.
courage to tape that. The
Mhm.
Aubrey killing, the young man who was jogging, who was hunted
Yes.
down,
In Georgia. Yeah.
again, it was caught on tape. The
Mhm.
woman, Amy Cooper, who was in Central Park and
Central Park. Yeah.
was called on the carpet by Chris Cooper, no relation. Both
Mhm.
happened to have been Ivy League graduates, and he was a
Mhm.
bird watcher. And she wanted to shout out and actually kind of utilize her white privilege to say, "Oh, you're
Mhm.
attacking me as an African American man calling 9/11." These are all
Right.
things that I think where technology is really kind of done us a service. So I really think that everyone, in some respects, can benefit from it. I think Black people can benefit from it in a unique way because, again, my
Mhm.
concern is having been a former chief diversity officer is I have seen a
Mhm.
distinct level of diversity, equity, and inclusion sliding off the priority list around
Mhm.
this country. I don't know if it's probably somewhat still blowback from
Mhm.
certain pockets of the organization and the country not really still accepting that we had a two-term Black president. And
Mhm.
is that blowback from that? But I do know that there was really starting to become a whole sentiment of the role that I had played, the colleagues that I have worked with not being taken. I won't say they weren't being taken this seriously, but I will say that I think not all CEOs were really embracing it and really thinking that there was, in fact, a business purpose behind the advantage and the contributions and the desire for the investment that it takes to really bring everybody to the table. So I really think that, everyone can benefit from this. But I will say this, Marlon, we have to
Mhm.
be very careful because what we
Okay.
have right now in this perfect storm is what I would call a window, and the window
Okay.
will not be open forever. We have a window of opportunity right now. And I think
Mhm.
it's always a terrible thing that, you have a crisis, you have a tragedy, you have over how many people in this
Yeah.
country who have died as a result of COVID 19,
Mhm.
how many individuals have died at the hands of police brutality. It's a terrible indictment. But, you know, we also have a duty, I really believe, that we cannot let these incidences and have these individuals who have been uh, killed or who have gotten sick or who have been left alone or have been out of a job, thrown out of their job
Right.
because of carelessness or because of self-interest and selfishness. So we have duty to, I think, ensure that we make this right and we do not let those efforts and that what has happened in those tragedies go in vain.
I like the fact that you said this, you know, the window of opportunity is definitely not going to be open forever. I mean, from here on out, government has already shown ways that they can close the gaps just by saying, okay, financially,
Mhm.
you know, we gave you stimulus, we gave you this, we're only giving it to you for so long, you know, because people were asking, you know, is there going to be another stimulus? And if so, how can I implement this? And you know,
Mhm.
the government's already saying, hey, we already started that. We already did that. We're moving forward. With that being said, is it fair to say that at this moment that the white race needs more diversity and inclusion training just because of the question marks that are still out there? Or
Do they need more training? You know, that's an interesting question because,
mm,
I mean, there is a whole school of thought around does training work at the end of the day?
mm-hmm,
And I would argue that I think that what I would venture to say instead is I think they need a whole lot more education.
okay,
There is a difference because I think training is sometimes around a program and it's start
mm-hmm,
and finish. And it doesn't mean that you're baking in something that's going to be a long-term output.
mm-hmm,
So what I have found works better with adults is because, frankly, one of the basic tenets of adult education is you can't really tell adults anything, right? Adults have to
well, yeah,
discover it for themselves,
for
and
themselves, yeah,
adults have to buy into why they want to do something. And I think part of, frankly, to your question, part of why I think diversity training hasn't really worked is because it's
mm-hmm,
really been a little bit of a band-aid approach. You know, oh, go sit in on a program and okay,
mm-hmm,
check the box. You get real impact when
mm-hmm,
an individual has an opportunity to experience what you are trying to describe. I
mm-hmm,
don't care how smart a person is. People, I think, again, as I said earlier, I think people are embracing what is going on now because they had the opportunity. And I've heard so many people say, I actually counted out those 8 minutes for George Floyd and how he died. I watched that actually happen in front of my eyes. You
mm-hmm,
know, it's an experience that they will never forget. So I think the extent to which we can share our
mm-hmm,
experiences, I think will go a long way towards starting the conversation. I think the other thing though that needs to
mm-hmm.
happen is we've kind of lost our North Star in terms of our moral sense.
What do you
And
mean?
I do believe that, and then frankly, I think a lot of it has to do with the leadership. You know, what is the leadership model coming out of our administration?
Okay.
Um, we have lost our way from the standpoint of being guided by what actually is the thing to do, what is the right thing to do, what is integrity, what does it
Mm-hmm,
mean to have duty and honor. I mean, these are
mm-hmm,
old words, but at the end of the day, really, when you think about our constitution and what it was written on, it really was written with these values in mind. And again, if we want to go to the 14th Amendment, equal justice under the law
equal
for
justice,
everyone,
yeah,
we have
yeah,
kind of gotten away from a lot of that. And I think that we're going to have to, as a people, not
mm-hmm.
just, just white people, I think black people too, we need a bit of training ourselves. We need
Good point.
education
Good
ourselves.
point.
I think part of what was so amazing to me was how many black people, I don't know about you, Marlon, how many black people did you talk to over the last 2 weeks who said to you, I didn't know anything about Black Wall Street in Tulsa
Hey,
until it became an issue.
yeah, yeah,
Are we really understanding what our history has been?
yeah.
Do we really know that there were Black people who actually owned the first seats on the New
Mm-hmm.
York Stock Exchange? You
Yes,
know, the Madam C.J. Walker story came out. A lot
yeah,
of people had never heard of her. So you
yes.
really have to educate yourself. You've got to read.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to study. I remember when I was in my role at the bank. as the chief diversity officer, and because I'm very much a believer in the experiential model of learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I did is I actually put together two opportunities for the bank members to go to. We chartered a movie theater, brought over
Right.
250 people to see Selma when the movie came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I told the people before the movie was aired, I said, look, there's going to be a young man that you see in a raincoat and a little backpack. Pay attention to who he is. And of course, the young person who was going over the bridge at that time was John Lewis. And as you know,
John
he was
Lewis.
hit
Yeah.
over the head by the policeman and cracked his skull, and he, continued on. Now, here's where the story gets really kind of interesting. I had talked to Congressman Lewis, and we had him come to the bank a month later.
Right.
He told a very compelling story about having become a congressman. And he said one day, and Congress people, I don't know how many of you had opportunity to visit your lawmakers. You really should take the trip to Washington at some point and know who your congressional representatives are. But they
Yes.
have constituents from their districts coming all the time to visit. So one day he said this older white gentleman comes in with his son, and he's a white gentleman, and so he greets him. He's a resident of Georgia, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The man says, I really need to talk to you. And he said, well, of course, sir. What is it that you'd like to talk about? And then he proceeds to tell him, I was the officer that hit you over the head.
Really?
And the story was so compelling
Oh
that
my God.
everyone, and he came to tell him that because he was asking for his forgiveness.
What was the chances of something like that to happen?
Well, and that's the whole point. And so,
Yeah.
this is where I think we have to remember that our African
Wow.
roots as storytellers, as they would
Yeah.
say in West Africa, the griots, the people that kept the history of a
Yeah. Yeah.
culture, we have to keep those stories going because we want to make sure that the next few generations know our history, know the strength of it, and know what the history is so they know how they can move forward. That's a
That
long way
draws
to
that.
answer your question, but I hope it does.
No, 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 no. That's perfectly fine because it draws me to ask a question that well, coming from the education arena, do you believe that we should install or redevelop how African American education is taught? Because I only remember a class that I had in my 10th grade year, and that was just an option. It was an elective. And then it was offered to me, obviously, in college. Now, had I not already had some of that personal knowledge myself, I don't think on the average that I would want to have, taken some of those classes because it wasn't pushed at the time. Now, I hear my son, he's 10 years old, and he calls me the other day and said, Dad, guess what I'm watching? I said, what? And he says, Malcolm X. I said, oh, really? I said, are you through the whole movie yet? And he goes, no, but what is Mecca? And so when he started asking me what Mecca was, I'm getting excited because I've always wanted him to get to this point to start asking these type of questions. So I really believe, and I was reading an article the other day. This black bookstore owner there in Atlanta,
Hmm.
you know, Atlanta, Georgia. Who would have thought that he has never in the 8 or 10 years that he had been that he's had his bookstore, he had never got to the point where he sold out his books, where he had a waiting list for his books. Well, right now he is on a waiting. He has a waiting list for a lot of his books, and guess what? It's not necessarily the black kids or the black people that's
Right.
buying it. It's white people who are buying it,
And
and they're
this is, yeah.
online every day. He's getting people calling him or sending him requests for certain books, and he says it's a shame that tragedies like this
Hmm.
have to happen to get people to say, okay, now I want to know. And that kind of brings me into this other question here, because most recently in the news, Aunt Jemima, Quaker Oats, Uncle Ben, Eskimo Pie, Chiquita Bananas, and Land O'Lakes, obviously, are the latest companies who have either changed their logos due to their products portraying racial
Hmm.
stereotypes. Now, are we really changing the culture or the intent of these companies' position by doing this moving forward?
I think it's a provocative question, and I can't really say, that's a question that I think you should ask the CEOs in those organizations.
Okay.
And the reason I say
Well,
that is because I think that they are responding immediately
mhm,
to the sentiment and not wanting to look out of step politically. Because, at the end of the day, I think the other thing that's really coming and striking is that the consumerism aspect and the dollars that are made from the Black consumer is finally also being acknowledged.
mhm,
It started with the sports companies like, Nike, et cetera, and the basketball Under Armour that are
mhm,
all that are modeled by a lot of athletes. But I would say that these business people understand that what we've got to look as if we understand who our customer is. So there's a business purpose in it. You asked a better question though: is are they changing the culture?
mhm,
And the culture,
mhm,
for those of us who are on your call today who may not be working in corporate America, when you hear people talking about what is culture,
mhm,
I'll kind of take it and simplify it at the end of the
mhm,
day. In the corporate world, people look at culture as basically what I would call the unwritten playbook of how
mhm.
people should act and how they shouldn't act, and what are the rules and protocols for people to move forward, and what are the things people will do that will get them in trouble.
Right.
So the part that makes it so difficult there is no book.
Mhm.
So you, as an employee, when you come aboard, you will
Yeah.
hopefully get paired with someone who will be a mentor to you. And anybody who's a young person of color, I don't care if you're young or old, whenever you
Mhm,
go to a new organization, you need to have somebody that you mentor with. And you
mhm.
need to have a sponsor. And Marlon, that's a whole conversation we could have at another time.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would say you need to really kind of get a handle on what that culture is. And folks, look, every place has a culture because every place has an unwritten set of rules. I mean, I can certainly say this to you as a
Mhm.
former first lady, which I did for 20 years. I said there's a culture in the Black church as well, because
Yes.
no matter where you go that
Yes.
certain things are okay and certain
Mhm.
things are not. And I have yet to see anybody actually produce a book that tells you how you should do your presentations, how you should make your announcement, how you should manage a meeting. There
Right.
are so many protocols that even within our own culture
Right.
that people who are not familiar with it stumble and fall in. And so that's why I'm saying it's a keen question because these
Mhm,
organizations, and this is what I am hoping the chief diversity officers and the
mhm,
talent people and other
mhm,
leaders in the organizations are going to do, that they are going to finally recognize that they need to shift the culture so that it becomes more inclusive. And I think at the end of the day, you're right.
mhm.
Isn't it nice to be able to change Aunt Jemima? Well, she's already
Yeah.
had a couple of updos, right? She took the do rag off of her to change the hairstyle.
The
Um,
Mamie, and I had that. I think I told you that I had this conversation with a lady in the store, and she was rushing down the aisle to get the last Aunt Jemima bottle that she could get, and she looked at me. She said, "Isn't it a shame?" And this and that, and I'm looking at her like I just shook my head. But at the end of the day, I couldn't blame her for the ideological, you know, I don't even know how to even say that. I mean, because in different races, and should I say in different families, we looked at these things differently. And of course, in her family, it was like, oh, if you had Aunt Jemima, you were good. That was the closest thing to, having something that was black in your house for
and this,
for some white people. And don't
right,
get
and
me
this is
wrong,
why we need to have those conversations
yeah,
because
and
on both sides.
yeah, and it was interesting because she even asked me. She said, "Don't you feel the same way?" I said, "No." I said, my grandmother, she made her own syrup. We when I asked my grandmother the question about Aunt Jemima, I never forget. She gave me the look like, "Are you kidding me?" And at that time, I didn't know what she meant. But as I got older, I was like, "Oh, now I understand." So that was in my house, but in most people's houses, it could be totally different. But that brings me to to say this, because you mentioned about being a first lady,
Mm,
ex-first lady, and
mm.
of course, faith is a big part of our lives. And as a practicing minister myself, I'm currently finishing my theological degree as we speak, and prayerfully in the
God
next year.
go with you.
It's interesting because somebody looked at my profile and they said, "Oh, well, I didn't know you were in school for to get a master's in divinity." And I said, "Yeah, went back to get mine." And through the COVID-19, I've had to take a break, of course. But it's an interesting journey.
Mhm,
But because I wanted to ask this question, because you mentioned as a first lady, there's no blueprint when it comes
mhm,
to how to act, how to do this, how to
mhm.
be the first lady
Right.
in all these different churches, I should say. But faith is a big part of our lives. How have you endured life with your faith? And do you feel we all have been tested more so lately than ever?
I mean, ask me how I've endured. I think, I think we all endure. I think the issue
Mhm.
is how do you utilize your faith? How do you activate your faith in
Right.
your real life? I mean, I kind of have always seen myself working in what I would call three concentric circles, right? One
Mhm.
circle is family, one circle is faith, one
Mhm.
circle is career,
Mhm.
career, outward work, community, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always tried to maintain some kind of a balance between all of those. And so
Mhm.
it's important because you need to have the faith. I see people all the time. This is
Mhm.
going to sound maybe for people who are very active in their religious organizations.
Right.
When I see people in the corporate world, and you can tell a mile away that they are not grounded. Their house has been built on sand. It's not built on rock. And you can
Mhm.
always tell because to your question about being tested, it will inevitably happen and it will
Mhm.
happen more than once. And the question becomes when you are put upon for those tests, how are you going to respond to it? Are you going to be Esther? Are you going to be saying there but for a time of this? I can say certainly
Yeah.
many times in my career, I have been first, I have been only, I have been one of a few. And for a lot of us of our generation as boomers, I said, we're the pioneer generation,
Mhm.
only succeeded by those who came before us, because each
Mhm.
generation you hope will stand on the shoulders of the next to make it better for the people. But we're all tested at some point, and I think that
It's true.
we're in a very interesting period of time right now. I don't know if I would say it's the most comprehensive testing period, but I will say I just read some
Mhm.
data today that was talking about Gen Z. Generation Z are your 20-year-olds right now, because don't forget, your millennials, your oldest millennials are turning 40, so we can't call them the kids
Right.
anymore. Um,
Right.
but the Gen Zs have identified that the pandemic actually is one of the events in their life which probably has shaped a lot of the way that they will go about looking at values in very much the
Yeah.
same way as a traditionalist who grew up after World War II and had to
World War
endure
Two.
living
Yeah.
in rations
Mhm.
really became the most thrifty generation because they never wanted to be in a situation where they didn't have enough.
Right.
So
Right.
it's interesting how these kinds of special situations can influence a whole generation in terms of how it's going to approach life going forward. So yes, to answer your question, yeah, I think we are being tested. I think
Mhm.
it's what you're going to do with it is what counts. And you said earlier, Marlon, I agree with you. We are in a window. There is tremendous opportunity. It's
Mhm.
all in how you want to look at the situation. Are you a glass half full? Are you a glass half empty? You have to
It's
make
true.
that call. You
It's
have
true.
to be responsible for your own happiness. Now, does that sound Pollyanna? To some people, it might, because we have
Mhm.
terrible situations, we have all kinds of things that happen to us. Guess what? At the end of the day, it's not an equal playing field. Sorry, folks. That is just the way life is. But at the
True.
end of the day,
Mhm.
we can't control the hand that we're dealt when we get started. We can control what we do with the hand that we were dealt. So the
That's a good.
question then
That's a good
becomes,
point.
what are you going to do in terms of you looking at yourself? And that's why I said embrace the pause. What are the things that you really want to do? What were your dreams that you really didn't make and for lots of different reasons? And what's holding you back from going after them now?
Great point. You know, earlier when I was reading your bio,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I had told people, I said, you're very accomplished. I like to call women young ladies, and in my opinion, you're still youthful. You're doing things as if you have no tomorrow. Uh, but when I was looking at your bio and the diversity in general of the
Mm-hmm.
positions that you have had,
Right.
one thing that I want to kind of go back to and just if for people who are joining us right now on this on our live with Brother Mays, and like I said, I'm changing the name to late night with brother Mays because we are in the late night hour, of course. Um, but one thing that I really wanted to cover real quick, prior to your appointment, and this is I'm reading directly from her bio here. Prior to her appointment, Diane to the Federal Reserve, Diane varied leadership roles at Citigroup included her selection to create and lead a team that would reposition and reinvigorate Citi's minority, women, and veteran supplier program to the point that in just 1 year, it was recognized by the company and the financial services industry as a value added $1 billion initiative.
Right.
Now, I'm going to stop right there because a lot of people get into positions and they don't get to that point of having that much power to make change. And you were dealing with a level of, and like I would call it, looking on from the outside looking in, you're dealing with a mass level of financial responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that being said, you spent over at least a quarter of your professional experiences changing the face of corporate America. If you could rewrite a moment of your past, what would it be and how would that have changed your approach toward life today?
So first, let me give a little bit of a clarification. I thank you for highlighting probably what was a mistake in my bio. It took 5 years for us to get from 400 million
5 years,
to
yeah,
billion.
because it stands out as 1 year, and
I got to
I'm
fix
sitting there
that.
going,
Thank you. We got
that's
to fix that.
amazing.
Yeah, right. It was 5 years, but actually
Okay.
it still is accelerated to go from
Uh,
400 to a billion 20. Um, but your question is interesting for me, and I'm going to say something which maybe you weren't expecting. The
no,
thing that
please.
I would rewrite is simply let me give you a little bit of history.
Uh,
So I'm the oldest of four children. My parents did not go to college, but my parents were always very interested in education,
mhm,
and they worked hard. My mom at one point, she was a registered nurse and one of the first
mhm,
Black women who were director of the OR operating room. My dad was a general contractor,
mhm,
and they decided to send their children to private school. And so we went. My sister Karen, who's 3 years younger than I, went to country day school.
mhm,
And then we had the arrival of two more children later on when I was in eighth grade. And so that kind of changed things a lot. But my early
yeah.
years, actually, I started taking foreign languages,
Okay.
and I started French in the second grade. I found out that I have a real aptitude for foreign languages. I've taken French, Spanish, German, and Latin.
Mhm.
And so in the third grade, I made a declaration that I want to be a diplomat and work in the US Foreign Service.
Really?
And that became my career goal
Uh,
from third grade to college. That is what kind of informed the courses that I took.
uh,
That actually informed the choice of the college that I went to. I went to Yale University because Yale had the best French department in the country.
exactly.
My
Exactly.
family had, no one in my family had ever lived abroad. And so that is the reason that I signed up for the junior year abroad and lived in France and went to the Sorbonne University, University of
Mhm,
Paris system
mhm,
to get an opportunity to see what it was like to live abroad. And
mhm,
all this was in preparation to work in the U.S. Foreign Service as a
mhm.
diplomat. What happened, Marlon, is although I had a great time, how can you not have a great time living in Paris when you're 19 years old? I came to a very sobering realization at the end of the year. And that was
Mhm.
simply that I don't want to live outside of the United States for 30 years from my career. And so, as I have conversations with younger people all the time now, I say to them, make sure you have a backup plan because
Yeah.
I did not. And I had put all the eggs in that basket that I was going to do this career path, and every one of those eggs broke.
Mhm.
I returned to my senior year in college totally depressed. I had no one to talk to. My grades plummeted because I was depressed, and I felt like I was alone. It was pretty terrible, frankly. I had to kind of find myself and dig myself back out. And I ended up in business because I needed to get a job.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it led me to human resources, which led me to do some consulting, which led me to a series of events. And I went back to grad school, lived in Boston when my former husband was doing his MDiv in the Boston area. So I
Right.
worked in New England Life. Um, and then I went from Boston and we moved back down here when he got called to a church in the New York, New Jersey area, which I was very happy to come back down to this
Mhm.
area. And it became a period of reflection for me because I came to a crossroads. I said, well, what am I going to do now? So I ended up taking a pretty bold move. And that's how I ended up working full time and actually attending Rutgers Law School
Rutgers
evenings.
Law School. Yeah.
And so it took me 4.5 years,
Mhm.
classes Monday to Thursday, 6 to 10 p.m. Went 4.5 years year round. I did not see a
Mhm.
movie for 4 years. Very tough, very tough
Really?
experience.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of those things you look back and you say, okay, that built character, but I sure want to do that again. But I got a JD, and I will tell you, it's a
Right.
degree I've never wanted to practice law, but
Okay.
it was very, very helpful working in the human resource area, and it's a degree I think which actually has had what we say in the law is a chilling effect on people that want to act up, and
Okay.
act who aren't don't want to have good intentions working with you, but because you understand the law, they kind of keep people at arm's length from some of
Mhm.
the activity that they would do. So I fast forward to working at the New York Fed. So I joined the New York Fed in 2007 under Tim
Right.
Geithner. For those of you who may remember, Tim Geithner was pulled out of his New York Fed presidency by President Obama. He
Right.
became the Treasury Secretary
Treasury
when
director.
President
Yeah.
Obama had his
Mhm.
first term and the two of them actually were pulled into a scenario. People don't forget, this is 2008, and the
Mhm.
stock market was going down 500 and 600 and 700 points a day. The
Right.
um, the country was really crashing, and I think really most of the American population. I was working in the Federal Reserve at that point, so I
Mhm.
saw the crisis from the inside out. American population has no clue of how close to the edge we really were in
Mhm.
terms of our economy. But thanks to them and thanks to some others who were working with them, we were able as an organization and as a country to kind of bring our economy back and bring
Mhm.
business back and get ourselves back on foot. So the whole notion about how great the economy is right now, really, I think credit has never really been given to President Obama for the work that he did, stepping
Yeah.
into a real mess, frankly, in 2009. So I was sitting one night in the middle of the
You
crisis.
bring up a great point. You bring up
Right.
a great point that really, I hope in the rebroadcast of
Yeah,
this, people really pay attention to that because that where we are now and where we were then, two different presidents, obviously, and two
absolutely.
different mindsets, two different administrations. So it's going to be very interesting how we go through this next plummeting of an economy, I should say.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, that just adds to the intention of it. We have
mhm.
the economy that, that is
Yeah,
slowly crashing and burning. We have,
yeah.
we have a pandemic, and don't forget under President Obama's administration, they had Ebola that they were dealing
Ebola.
with.
Yeah,
They had
yeah.
SARS that they were dealing with. They had
Hmm.
MERS that they were dealing with. These were those flesh-eating bacteria, and
Yeah,
it never got to this level. And part of why it never got to this level is because the administration in those days believed the science. Dr.
yeah.
Anthony Fauci was also working in that role during that
Yes, he
period of
was.
time, and he made sure, working with the administration, that we put all that in check, and we did not allow it to get out of control, which is what
Mhm.
happened here. Um,
Well,
but back to the. Let me just finish on the other
no,
story.
no, no. Please go ahead. You're good.
So the long and short of it is, during the crisis one night, I was thinking about, you're having one of those moments where you say like, okay, so what is the meaning of all this? And
Mhm.
I'm sitting there as a chief diversity officer in the Federal Reserve, and I'm trying to get this organization, which has really been a very mature organization, very conservative organization, an organization that is predominated by economists with their thinking. And that has not necessarily been an organization that would embrace diversity and inclusion naturally, right? Um, and so I was sitting there having this moment, and I said, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? What is the work of what you're doing? The work of what I'm doing is bringing people together who have different points of view. It's bringing the New York Fed, I think, had something like 30 different nationalities represented in the office. So you're bringing people from different backgrounds, different sexual preference, different genders, different agendas, different educational backgrounds. And and in an academic, quasi-academic environment, and also quasi-governmental environment, and in the middle of a crisis. And I said, you know what? It hit me like a ton of bricks, Marlon. I said, wait a minute. You wanted to be a diplomat. Oh, so what you're doing, actually, you could change your title from Chief Diversity Officer to Chief Diplomatic Officer. My point is, folks, you will oftentimes, if you really stay focused, be open to understanding that you will get your wish, and you can get your wish, but you've got to be open. You've got to be willing to be patient, to work toward it, and to realize that it may not look like you originally thought it was going to look, but it is attainable.
Wow. That's a great point. And I don't think it's just a point for younger or the youth or anyone that's just going into the professional limelight of a career, but that's a point taken for those who have been there. Because as you mentioned, embracing the pause, a lot of people have been on their jobs 20 years and 25 years. And I had a friend of mine who was on his job 33 years on the day, and he was retiring on the 34th year, and he was told, hey, go home, we'll call you in a month. That month came and he no longer had a job. So he lost a lot of his retirement, what he thought that he would have. And I think people have gotten to the conformality that if I have to start over, then let me reach back to what it was that I really wanted to do. And so when you said what you just said, being open to that I think that's I think a lot of people have touched on that, because they're saying, okay, I've been fighting it for a long time. I have no choice but to be open. So either way it goes, you're finding, people are finding their way to embrace that pause. You mentioned earlier, and this, I know it's getting late and I want to kind of close this interview here, but you mentioned earlier about working with youth, and I know you have a passion, obviously, from a previous conversation, about young women, especially young women of color, especially our Black girls. Can you tell me more of how your current work as a CEO of Diversity Accounts, or just in general, just your work outside of the office, what's that role like? I mean, how are you bringing joy, I should say, to some of these young ladies?
So, I think I have a close place in my heart for young women of color, because I always look at them and say, that was me.
Gotcha.
And again, as you heard me say earlier, being first or being only, back in the day when I went to Yale University, coeducation was still a new thing. In our class of 1,100, we had 39 Black women. Not all graduated our year.
Wow.
So we were kind of unique in the campus, and people were not used to seeing us on the campus. And I can remember being in the dining hall and having the old alumni men sitting at a table not too far from you and saying, you could overhear them talking loudly that, they're ruining our campus. And, that kind of comment, you hear that kind of stuff and you get used to that. I think you asked me earlier too, a question around like, would I've done anything differently? I mean, the one thing that I will say is, young women, you really try to reach out and talk to some people who have had some experience, because
Yeah.
I did a lot early years, a lot of trial and error and a lot of errors,
Mm,
because
mm,
I didn't know. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know
mm,
what to say. I didn't know
mm.
what was the unwritten playbook for the culture. And
Right.
the only other way you can do it if you don't have anybody to talk to is you try things out, and a lot of times what you may be doing is not working. So, what's great to see now is I see a lot of younger women who have really kind of grabbed onto opportunity because it's more available now than it was for us. Um, and I think that, that's a wonderful thing. The extent to which I can try to help, I do. In my current organization, DTA Diversity Counts,
Mm,
what I have really been concentrating on more recently has been a number of people have come, and not so much younger women at this point. It's really been more actually middle and senior level women who have
mm,
called to talk about executive coaching for their career, or for positioning, or for thinking through about opportunities. Should I take this role versus that role? Should I have this
right.
conversation versus that one? Should I present this versus that? Those are the kinds of conversation that I have had. But in the past, I have worked in things. I'm a member of my local chapter of the Links. I'm in an organization called the Doll League, and
Mm,
these are groups that actually do have service projects for younger women, of course. So I do stay in focus from that perspective. The other thing I think that I would say is I have also too done some work with Yale Women to kind of
mm,
reach out to the Black women who are at Yale, and
mm,
it's been, I think, satisfying. It's at time
right.
frustrating, but satisfying from the standpoint of having that moment. And also too, I think during my work career, I should say too, having that moment where you have a conversation with someone, or you can make an introduction, or you open a door for someone and you see the light bulb go off and they finally get it.
You get it.
That's something
Yeah.
that I really get a lot of joy out of seeing happen. And I won't say,
Mm,
I'm not going to say from the standpoint of young guys, look, that I'm throwing you to the side, not at all, because I think that there's a
yeah.
lot of good that comes out of obviously working with you as well. But I would say
Mm,
certainly from the standpoint of really intimately more understanding the unique frustrations and challenges of being a woman in the workplace, it still
yeah.
exists.
Yeah.
It's a real situation. It has gotten better, but it's not 100% better. Women still are not on par in terms of pay equity. So, we need to be aware of that. And I think one of the things that I think, again, Marlon, we haven't really touched on today in terms of shaping the culture is going to
Yeah.
be not only some honest conversations about race, but at some point we're going to have to really kind of get back to the honest conversations about white women and Black women, because there are some real issues around trust,
Yeah.
building relationships, and there's a disconnect on some level for sometimes women working together in that kind of a way.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to say this. I mean, and again, I thank you for taking the time out to really have this conversation. When I got the opportunity to know a little bit about you, and of course from a mutual friend that we both have, I said this is somebody that I think people need to know, and not to say people don't know you. I mean, obviously you're known, but I think a lot of times what we do, especially in the Black community, we we'll hear a name or we'll see somebody, but we'll never take time to ask.
Hmm.
We'll just be like, okay, that's what they do.
Hmm.
But something I didn't learn until prior to talking to you was that with the Federal Reserve Bank itself, I mean,
Hmm.
13 different reserve banks, is that correct?
There are 12 reserve banks around the country, and the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. is the headquarters.
Is it
It's a
headquarters?
very
Okay.
unique. The Federal Reserve is considered the United States central bank, and they are
Okay.
responsible for oversight of all the banks in terms of supervision. For payments, you have you want to make sure your direct deposit clears. That's ACH, automatic
ACH,
clearinghouse,
yeah, yeah.
right? And they have oversight also too. New York Fed is unique because it also interfaces with
Mm,
the foreign central banks and Wall Street. So they also make sure that the markets are regulated in terms of discount.
mm,
The Federal Reserve was established in 1913, and it was considered the bank of last resort. And that was actually so that if banks, for example, are out of money, they can go to the Federal Reserve, they can borrow. That's part of what happened during the financial crisis. That's why the banks created all those funding facilities. But Marlon, I will say to you, one of the things that I was very passionate about doing in my 12 years there was bringing in as many Black people as I could. We bring
Yeah,
in classes, we bring in students, we had programs, we had a whole program that we put together for high school juniors that was math times economics equals your future. And it was for
wow.
juniors that were aspiring juniors who maybe had aptitude for math. And it
Right.
was to really introduce them to the work of being an economist because,
Mhm.
frankly, in most of our families, we may have been taught about being an accountant, being a financial planner, you
Mhm.
know, something in that, being a controller. But
Mhm.
how many Black families talked about being an economist?
That's
And
true. That's
one of the
true.
things that I learned is, first of all, there is a huge deficit of representation in that field. We
Mhm.
don't have enough at all. And when you see things like what's going on in the economy, you see the decisions being made about housing, labor. This is where you need somebody sitting at the table as in one of the decision-making roles. So I really wanted to ensure that we had Black young people who had an opportunity to be exposed
Right.
to that. We also did a lot of workshops for young girls, like the organization called Black Girls Code,
Black
and
Girls Code. Yes.
that
Yes.
came out of San
Yeah.
Francisco, and it's an organization that really is trying to advance young women learning how to code, computer
Right.
code.
Mhm.
It's a STEM career, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
we want to have more of that happen. You know, people have seen the movie Hidden Figures.
Hidden
Those
Figures. Yeah.
ladies were probably early models of STEM, people that
Mhm.
are working in those roles where they have quantitative analysis as their
Mhm.
skill. So I would just say that I think there's again opportunity to move people forward, and I do have a passion about it. That is absolutely
Mhm.
correct. And so I am continuing to, in this role that I am in right now, I
Mhm.
am kind of, I'm doing two things. I'm looking to take the 25 years of advisory experience that I've gained and share it with organizations as
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
requested. And I must tell you, the last month and a half, it's been extremely busy.
Yeah, I was gonna say you've been busy already,
It's
so I'm
been
trying to figure out how
busy.
you're gonna squeeze that in. But
And the other thing I would say also too is I really am looking at some point to hopefully to be able to take the experience that I have had serving on 6 not-for-profit boards of directors and trustees to
Mhm.
work on a corporate board of directors or an advisory group because I really am a huge believer. Again, this is an area where we don't have enough representation in terms of minorities sitting at the
Right.
table. And you as a board of director person have an opportunity to have governance, which means that you are helping management to think through their strategy without being part of management. So I'm really excited about the opportunity, hopefully that will come forth in the not too distant future.
Well, we was talking off air, and I think you'd be a really good fit. And I'm gonna put it out there, Wes Pratt. You Missouri State University Chief Diversity Officer has this wonderful conference every year in April. I think you found your next speaker. It's right here. So I'm definitely gonna make sure he sees this because I think that you would be a great addition in that limelight. But hey guys, if you were just joining us or you were coming in, my guest tonight was Diane T. Ashley, obviously CEO of DTA, or should I say Diversity Counts. Am I saying it right? Diversity Counts,
ETA
and
diversity counts.
she's a former VP, Chief of Diversity Officer, of course, of Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and of course work with Citigroup as well. You can, if you really want to dive into this interview, please watch the rebroadcast of this tomorrow, or you can go to Live W Brother Maze. That's spelled the Soul Way, BROTHAMAZE.com, and you can check us out and in the rebroadcast. Guys, there was two questions that did come in, and I do apologize, but I do want to go ahead and ask this one because
Sure.
it was asked, and I want to give her a chance. And her name is Linda, and she is coming from Louisiana, Shreveport. Well, looks like Shreveport, Louisiana. But her question was, do you see yourself uh, doing a program or starting a program that would invite young African American women or women of color on a national level to do a conference? Do you see yourself doing something like that in the
You know,
near
I
future?
may do something like that. I will say to her that there are a lot of established programs right now.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's an interesting question. What I would love to find out from her is what is her interest? Because what you can do is you can pair what she wants to do and her interests with what is the appropriate group to align with.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I may end up doing something like that. It's kind of an interesting idea. I'm a little smiling because that's not something I had anticipated thinking about, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know. You
You
never
never
know.
know. Right.
This could connect you and get one of those phone calls that you keep getting every day. So somebody from this might see this and go, "I'm gonna call her." Well, tell me this real quick. How would someone reach out to you to if they ever wanted to acquire you or just like to know a little bit more about Diane?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. One is obviously I am on LinkedIn. You can find me
Okay.
at LinkedIn as Diane Ashley.
Okay.
And I'm also too, I have an email address. My business email is Diane, Diane, at DTA Diversity Counts, one word.com.
Gotcha.
So, you know, I'd love to hear from you if you have a question, if you'd like to you know, talk about an issue,
Mhm.
feel free to drop me a line. And I'd love to just kind of connect with whatever you have in mind, because you know, at the end of the day, you need to embrace your pause so that you can be
Amen.
the best
Yes.
person that you can be.
Well, I tell you what, even though it started a little late, we had like I said, I'm gonna change the name of this show called Late Night with Brother Mays and everything. But if I was gonna do this again late night, I mean, why not? You know, you were perfect. I appreciate you for joining the show, and hopefully in the near future, I'm gonna have you back on to do a whole panel on diversity and inclusion because I think out of all this, we all are going to need some re-education. So
Mhm.
thank you again, and again, guys, thank you for joining me. Join me next week. I have a big surprise for you. Got a special guest that we hopefully gonna be talking about credit. So all y'all that get you,
Oh, okay.
yes, 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 yes. So
Uh-huh.
join me next
Okay.
week. And hey, I'm gonna be flying out this week. I got some business to take care of. So y'all be watching some rebroadcasts in between. But in the between, with that being said, everyone please be safe. If you step outside your house, you go anywhere, wear your mask. Let's not be like the current number 45 and feel like nothing's really happening. Okay. So hey, as I always say, it's your brother from another brother Mays, and I'm out. Peace.
Yes, thanks. Be
Thank you,
safe.
Diane. You have a good one. Thank
Take
you.
care.
All right, you
Bye.
too. Bye bye.